Hi there, welcome to video 4, looking at a back to basics approach of setting up Axis and Ohs. Looking at the 152 to start with, because what I want to use is to use templates more and use the new input events as much as possible. So today I want to build a template just for this radio stack, so that if I see that in any other aircraft I can just apply that as a template and speed up the development. So let's bring in Axis and Ohs, and this is where we left it at the end of the last video, that I'd created two templates. Well, one is a link template for the Honeycomb Yoke, and this is merged, the throttle quadrant template merged into it. Because I want to make a new template, a fresh template, I'm going to empty this current configuration and make the radio template. So if we go into the cockpit now, and let's have a look at that radio stack. Let's zoom in a bit and bring it into focus. The radio stack has an inherent problem, that it's got two controllers here. The outer controller does the megahertz, and that works absolutely fine. The inner one does the kilohertz, and it's got a weird, not problem, feature, I don't know which it is. If I roll up, you see it goes up to 8.55, 8.6, 6.5, and then it jumps straight to 7.5. It's got some missing frequencies. Now I don't know if that's a bug, or they're trying to emulate the problems that people have with older radios and the newer spacing of frequencies. But in the Microsoft kind of simulation, you have to have the frequency spot on to connect to the station that you want to connect to. So I'm going to work on that as part of the scripting that I'm going to do to make the radio stack work. What I'm trying to achieve, if I bring in my camera, is I want all of the comms for both comms radio 1 and 2 on this section here. I want this knob to emulate the stacked double rotary, so it does megahertz and kilohertz for both radio 1 and radio 2, and I'm going to choose that radio by using this to swap. So this button here, pressing that button, will swap between megahertz and kilohertz mode. This button here will swap me between radio 1 or radio 2. This button here will swap active to standby, and the rotary will do what it's supposed to do for the rotary. That's what I'm trying to achieve. So I need a couple of variables. I need one that will keep track of whether we're in kilohertz or megahertz mode. So using the script editor, I need to create a group for that radio. I don't want to put that radio stuff into a particular aircraft, because I want to be able to swap it around from aircraft to aircraft. So we're going to add I'm going to call it the 152 radio. I don't know the model number, but I'm just going to call it my 152, and we'll add that group in, and you can see here I've got a blank group. And my script obviously has to go into that group, and I'm going to create one variable to keep track of whether in megahertz or kilohertz. So I'm going to call this one here my com kilohertz, and the function is to toggle between megahertz and kilohertz. So I need to create my own local variable to make this work. So it's an L for a local variable, and I'm going to call it my com kilohertz. I'm going to copy that with the Control C, and the function that I want to use, I want to toggle it from 0. By default it'll be 0, so it'll default to this top radio here. So when this is 0, it's going to be that radio there. But when I press it, I want it to toggle. So that's the exclamation mark, which is a logic function. It's a logic not, which will turn a 0 to a 1 or a 1 to a 0. And I want it to put that variable, the value of that variable, back into the same variable. So I'll just paste that in, put the input sign, and we'll save that as a new function. So that's done. I also want to do the same sort of thing for this radio here, which radio I'm talking to. So rather than my kilohertz, this one here is going to toggle my radio. So instead of kilohertz here, we'll just put radio here and here as well. And save that as a new script. So I've now got these two scripts here, and we'll allocate those to the correct buttons here. So I'll just search for my 152 and that should do it for me. So my 152, I want the kilohertz toggle to go on this button here. So we'll press this button to allocate it and click add. And we'll apply the same filter down here. And this one is the one that swaps the radio toggle. So I've got my kilohertz toggle and my radio toggle allocated. So now what I want to do is to create a script that will do the decrease and another script to do the increase for the frequencies. So we need the script again. And this one will be my com. We'll do the decrease one first of all. Now, I need to know whether I'm decreasing megahertz or kilohertz. So I need to look at that variable. And I've got my one here. Yeah, there's my NavCom kilohertz, so we can drop that in there. So I want to look at that variable and check if it's 0. Is it equal to 0? Because if it is, what I want you to do is to decrease my megahertz. So, sorry, that's a sim event that I want to put in, and it's from the com section. So we'll apply that filter, and first of all I'm going to check out these input events, and there is one here for the com 1 megahertz. But the 1 means increase, so I need to change that to a 0. So if we're in megahertz mode, do that. If we're not in megahertz, we want to do something else. And what we want to do is to look at the standby frequency. So we're looking in the com section here, and we're looking for the standby frequency, the com standby frequency, and it's this one here we're going to use. Now the index is where we tell it we're looking at radio 1, but we don't want it to come in binary code decimal. Too difficult to work with. Actually what we want is the result in hertz, because what we want to do is to take 5,000 off of that value. So 5,000 with a minus sign, and now we're going to write that back into the sim event. Or what we want to do is to write the standby radio set back in hertz. So we're using that one there. But what we've got to be careful of is it puts this 1 automatically for us, and we don't want to write 1 to it. We want to write our new calculated value back to it. Okay, so that's what we do for if it's radio 1. We decrease radio 1, and this one here is the kilohertz decrease for radio 1. But what we want to do is to have it choosing whether we're doing radio 1 or radio 2. So before we get there, we need to check the radio variable. Which one are we looking at? So again, in my local variables, I've got my COM radio, and again I'm going to check if it's equal to 0, and if it is, I want you to do this bit here, and if it's not, I want you to do something different. I want you to do the same stuff but to COM radio 2. So there's my else, and again I can copy this lot here and paste it in there in between, and I'm just changing this now so it's going to do COM 2. So where it says COM 1 here, that should be a 2, that should be a 2, and that should be a 2. So I've got this, looks complicated, but for each of the radios it's checking out whether we're doing kilohertz or megahertz and updating the megahertz or updating the kilohertz accordingly. Okay, so that's how this one works. So we'll save that as a new script and we'll just test that out now. So we need to apply that to the rotary. So in here I've got my COM decrease allocated to that one there. So it should do megahertz, kilohertz, and I should be able to swap it to radio 2 and do yep, doing the kilohertz and then toggle it back to megahertz. Let's go back to radio 1. So that works. We've got that working, doing all the functions. So we need to have an increase version of that. So if we go back to our scripting, we can actually use the decrease to build the increase. So change the name, so we're going to increase, and all we're doing really is changing that to a 1 because that's going to be an increase, and the minus sign so that should now do the increasing. So we can save that as new and allocate that function. And it's the increase version, and that's to the knob going clockwise. Add. So now we're going to check that. Increase, decrease for 1, megahertz, kilohertz, that's working absolutely fine. Let's take it to radio 2 now, and going in both directions for that one and both directions for the megahertz. So we'll take it back to radio 1 so we know where we are. So the last one now is to do this swap button. So again, a little bit of scripting, making sure that it's going into the radio section, and this one here is going to be the active swap. So we'll just call it my swap, and what we need to do is to find out whether it's talking to radio 1 or radio 2. So we're doing that comparison thing again. Is it equal? And if it is, what I want you to do is to swap the radio 1. So NavCom 1 swap. Else, if it's not radio 1, it must be radio 2. input event COM2 swap. Save that as new and allocate it to the button. So we'll just check that out. So if I press swap now, I should see the active and standby swapping for radio 2 and radio 1. Now we'll swap it to radio 2 and it works for that. So we've now got that section completely built. And pretty much the same should happen for the nav section, so we can actually use that as a bit of a template and copy and allocate those across. But it's slightly easier because we don't need to do the strange mathematics for the kilohertz. That just works. But if we copy, paste and edit scripts, that should be the quickest way to do this. So into scripts editor, and what I want to do is to work my way along here. So the decrease version, my COM decrease, will become my nav decrease. And we'll be looking at this variable here for my nav radio. And my nav kilohertz. And this will be nav1, I believe, but we can check that out by doing the insert sim event and filtering for nav, and just check out the format of these events. NavCom nav1 is what we're looking for. NavCom nav1 megahertz, and that's the same. So yes, we can just edit here for nav. Now this bit here we don't need anymore, this strange maths, so we can clear this out. And we can just insert the kilohertz event. Nav1 kilohertz, and make sure it's a decrease version. This is going to be nav. We can delete this bit and repair the missing brackets, and we can either copy and paste from here, or we can insert the sim event again. Never 1 kilohertz, but make it the decrease version. Okay, so we can save that. That's the decrease done. Now we need to do the COM increase version. And make it the nav version. Again. Deleting that, insert the sim event. And that is the increased version, so that can stay as it is. and save that. Want the nav kilohertz toggle. Nav radio toggle. And the swap, we need a nav swap one. Okay, so we just double check through those. Here's my nav decrease, nav increase, and that should be a nav there. That should be a nav there. Update that. Let's go back and check. That looks better. Update that one. I will check it. Yeah, that looks okay. Nav kilohertz toggle, yes. Nav radio toggle, yep. And then nav swap. We'll try allocating those and see if this works. So my nav radio, my nav decrease is this one here. Let's turn that one. My nav increase, my nav kilohertz toggle is this button here, so we press that one. My nav radio toggle is this one. This toggles us between nav radio 1 and nav radio 2. Click add. And my nav radio swap is this one. And now we'll just test it out and make sure it works. The nav radio is doing megahertz, kilohertz, swapping it to number 2. Ah, we've got one wrong there. So we need to look at that script. This is where I've got my slight bug. I forgot to change that to nav 2, so we'll change that to a 2 and click on update. Now we'll check that through again. So I've got increase and decrease on nav 2, megahertz and kilohertz, nav 1, megahertz, kilohertz, and active swap for 1 and 2. So we've got that working now. Okay, there's one little thing to point out back on the radio side of things, that if I'm working in the kilohertz mode, as we go roll over the 0 here, it's actually going to work with carry. It's just the way the maths works. As I go over here, you'll see the megahertz flip up by 1. If I go backwards, it goes down by 1. So just be aware of that. Okay, so we've got all that working now. I'll do another video where I'll show you how to get the LEDs to show you which mode that we're in. Okay, I'll see you in the next one.